Our first panel, Ron Boltz representing the Pennsylvania Liberty Alliance and Jim Rodkey, the Pennsylvania Property Rights Association. Welcome, gentlemen. Please begin.
Hello, my name is Ron Boltz. The majority of Pennsylvania citizens have been speaking for well over a decade, and their opinion of the school property tax couldn't be more clear. They want it eliminated, not temporarily reduced, not temporarily frozen, but eliminated. The proof of this continues to pile up. The Pennsylvania Liberty Alliance recently delivered over 30,000 petitions to Governor Wolf signed by Pennsylvania homeowners who wish to see the complete elimination of the school property tax. In 2017, Pennsylvania voters passed a constitutional amendment to allow up to a 100% property tax exclusion for primary residences, which resulted in 84% of our counties saying yes, with an average vote split being 60-40. An FNM poll released just this month also backs this up, stating 61% of registered voters in Pennsylvania believe that the state's tax system needs a fundamental overhaul, and 60% believe that property taxes should be replaced by broader statewide taxes. So the question is, if everybody knows the property tax is so unfair, so regressive, and so hated, why are we still here talking about it? The answer to that question is quite simply, and unfortunately, politics, special interest opposition, and the fear of change. Two of the biggest talking points we hear in defense of the property tax are that it's a stable source of revenue and that it provides local control. On their face, these talking points may sound reasonable, but when examining them in closer detail and with all of the facts being considered, we see a very different story. The main argument against shifting to an income tax or sale tax are that these sources are too unstable and that revenue can go down during economic downturns. While this may be true, the opposite is also true. Revenue goes up during good economic times, and in fact, time spent in positive territory is much, much greater than the time spent in the red, which is very little. An IFO report issued to Representatives Pashinsky and Sterla last year confirms this, as it shows the overall rate increase of PIT revenue from 2004 to 2018, keeping pace with the property tax revenue rate increases during the same time period. For anyone who doubts that we can fund our schools with these two sources, please consider this. The personal income tax rate has been raised only one time over the past 27 years, and the sales tax has remained the same since 1968. Yet our state budgets have grown dramatically over that time period. As for the single PIT increase that we've seen over the last 27 years, it was a relatively small 0.12 percentage points. Compare that to the property tax rate increases that we have seen over the past 3 decades, and it becomes a very difficult argument indeed to say that the PIT and the SUT are not stable enough to fund our schools. If these sources can fund our state and taxpayers must live with economic realities, why then do some say that the institutions that educate our children do not have the ability to manage their budgets the same way? The last point I'd like to make about the supposed stability of the property tax is that it does not consider that schools spend time and money chasing delinquent taxes, fighting assessment appeals, and dealing with the loss of revenue when businesses leave or turn to nonprofit tax-exempt status, like we're seeing many of our hospitals doing now. Above all else, this argument does not consider the instability that this creates for the tax-paying homeowner, as their taxes keep going up to make up for losses elsewhere. For the simple misfortune of not being able to pay his tax, we kick families out of their homes. They're treated like hard criminals, while those who actually do commit hard crimes often realize a much lesser punishment. The other argument about local control is equally as flawed. As a former school board member myself, I have seen the supposed local control firsthand, from the thousands of pages of regulations to the unfunded mandates to the pension issue. I can tell you that local control is largely a myth. The wife of my colleague who will be speaking right after me said it best. Local control really means controlling the locals, as Harrisburg decides what the local districts must do with their local revenue, while at the same time avoiding accountability for making those demands. We often hear that we need to address the cost drivers before we eliminate property taxes, but the opposite is in fact true. We currently have a system where many of the biggest cost drivers, such as the pension, are controlled by Harrisburg, but paid for in a large part by local revenue. If we expect politically difficult changes to the cost drivers, while those who need to make these changes can continue to pass the buck to the local school boards and local taxpayers, we're going to be waiting a very long time. We're reaching a breaking point, and Pennsylvania taxpayers are becoming more and more frustrated. All of the so-called solutions that have been tried or offered up to this point have not and will not fix the problem. The promise of legalized gambling to fixing our property tax problems has failed miserably and has left Pennsylvanians even more skeptical of their state government. More frequent countywide reassessments are certainly not the answer, as they fix none of the inequities, none of the unfairness, and the cost drivers associated with the current system remain in place. In fact, many members of my organization have done studies around the state using real data in counties that did local countywide reassessments. We found that the assessments were just as inaccurate after the reassessment as they were before, and taxpayers had to pay millions of dollars to achieve essentially nothing. During these studies, we also looked at property tax payments as a percentage of mortgage payments. For example, in Upper Darby, we found that the lowest valued homes would have a property tax payment twice that of the mortgage payment. This is not unique to this area, but rather occurs in many other areas across the state, driving down home values and making home ownership more and more difficult. We also found the highest millage rates often occur where incomes are the lowest. No wonder why so many people are trapped into a lifetime of renting. Simply increasing the state share of public education funding is not the answer either. We often hear that the state contributes less as a percentage than other states, and some legislators point to increasing the state's share while not eliminating the property tax as the solution. It is not. Historically, the state has increased funding almost every year, but yet the property tax always continued to climb at a higher rate. The high rate of property tax increases is one reason why the state's share appears low by comparison, but according to 2016 census data, Pennsylvania is ranked 7th in overall per pupil spending. The bottom line is that total and permanent elimination is the only answer. Reassessments have not fixed the problem, reduction schemes have not and will not fix the problem, and none of the unfairness or inequities would be addressed with either of these ideas. Doing so-called targeted relief for only certain people will only shrink the tax base and put even more burden on our working families. We hear ideas of eliminating or freezing for seniors only, but that would be absolutely devastating to the rest of the homeowners who are already struggling and would see enormous increases to their tax burdens to make up for it, not to mention even larger increases going forward, further compounding the problem. It's time to eliminate the property tax and treat all property taxpayers equitably and eventually all children equitably. The very reason we have such inequities in school funding is because of the property tax system. I sincerely hope that the school lobby groups who have been so reluctant to change finally realize that the inequities our schools face were created by the current property tax system. No new funding formulas and no adjustments to state revenue will ever fix this. When weighing out the pros and cons of eliminating the school property tax, it's abundantly clear that the pros far outweigh the cons. It's long past due for Harrisburg to catch up to where taxpayers have been on this issue literally for decades. We currently have several elimination plans to look at. All have their pluses and minuses, which we can and should discuss. But while we compare different ideas to each other, let's be sure we also compare each idea to the status quo, which is irreparably broken. I'd like to thank Senator Kristen Phillips Hill for hosting this workshop in her district, and thank you to all the legislators who continue to push this rock up the hill. Thank you.
How do we coalesce around one bill? There's 5, 6, 10, 15 floating around out there. Ron, Jim, you'd indicated, you saw, I think, a preference, and you didn't go into great detail, so why don't I throw it to you as to why your members have said this is the answer, not this one or this one or this one.
Well, as I stated in my remarks, members of my organization feel that the evidence of the past attempts to reduce through casino gambling revenue and so forth have proven to fail. They're proven failures. Simply put, if we reduce the property tax but don't eliminate it, we fear it's just going to continue to go up. We're going to be paying extra taxes for that temporary reduction, and we're going to soon find ourselves we're not solving anything with a reduction plan is our fear. And in fact, may even be making things quite worse. The targeted relief that I keep hearing about, anytime we shrink the tax base and we put more burden on our working families, I think this is counterproductive. Many working families, not just seniors that have a problem with this issue. Working families struggle as well. They get kicked out of their homes as well too. If we're going to talk about 30%, give or take, of the revenue for property taxes being put forward, being paid by seniors, somebody else has to make that up. So if we're already having struggling working class families, adding an extra 25–30% to their tax burden by shrinking the tax base for targeted relief, that's just going to compound the problems going forward. And keep in mind that every increase also going forward is going to be that much larger as well to sustain the schools. We believe shrinking the tax base is absolutely the wrong way to go. We need to do the opposite and expand the tax base. Mr. Chairman, can I ask something real quick? I'll be brief. One of the things that I left out because of my time restraint in my opening remarks was this winners and losers thing that we always constantly hear, and we heard it again today, and really quickly. That's one of the reasons why also we propose and support only total elimination, because we don't believe any other system is going to fix the current system, which is really where the winners and losers are created. We don't view property tax elimination as creating new winners and losers, even though we constantly hear it. We consider the property tax system, the creation of those winners and losers, and eliminating that tax as the solution, because every single taxpayer under many of these proposals would be treated exactly the same way. Everybody pays the same PIT, everybody pays the same sales tax. That's fixing the winners and losers scenario that we currently have. And to address the some people will pay more, I have an IFO report here, actually issued to Representative Ryan, that proves unquestionably that there will be more quote-unquote winners than losers financially. But I'd like to actually use Mr. Burkhart's own examples of his residents in his district paying 3.75 to 4.6% of their income towards their school property taxes. And in Mr. Scavello's neighborhood, we were up and doing a town hall up there. We had a single mother who was paying 14% of her income just towards her school property taxes. 3.75 to 4.6% of income is a lot more than most of the proposals that, well, pretty much than all of the proposals that we've been hearing about today. So there will be by far more quote-unquote financial winners, at least we're talking about homeowners here, than there would be losers. We don't believe any other system would result in such good numbers that way. And again, we do have, this isn't just my opinion, we do have actual solid numbers from the fiscal office to back up what I'm saying. Thank you.